Hey, everybody. Thanks for coming to the Training-Led Growth Podcast. I'm Joe, your host. Had a great conversation today with Patrick Osborne from HP Enterprise, HPE. And he's a super smart, really interesting guy. Gave a ton of insight around how they run their business. He's the VP and general manager over the hyper-converged infrastructure. And ton of insight around customers, how they sell differentiators, and then obviously training and how do they keep their customers engaged. He shared some really great knowledge around what they're doing now and how things have changed from when he started an industry over 20 years ago with Sun Microsystems all the way through to where he is now with HPE. How pricing models have changed, how they're engaging with customers now, how learning and training, how they're engaging with learning and training earlier and earlier, even when customers are prospects still, which I was super excited to hear about, as you know, with training-led growth. So thanks for your interest. Shared some really great wisdom and nuggets of information, and thanks for watching. Really appreciate it. And, like and subscribe and comment and ask me questions, and I'll be sure to respond. Hi, welcome to another edition of the Training-Led Growth Podcast. I'm your host, Joe Moriarty. Thanks again for your interest in looking here. Today I'm joined by a very, very special guest who's a longtime friend, but also is big in industry. He's been in IT his whole career. We got a ton of insight and interesting stuff to talk about. This is Patrick Osborne. Thank you, Patrick, for joining.
Well, thanks for having me. Excited for the podcast. It's great.
Thanks, buddy. Hey, thank you so much for joining. So you've had an amazing run of interesting jobs, I would say. And so I want to talk to you and introduce you just a little bit about the history and where you came from. So living in the Boston area, graduated Boston College, went to Sun Microsystems out of school. So that's kind of the first big one. Moved on to kind of a startup, what I would consider kind of a startup, kind of head of business development for iBricks, which is a really cool company I want to talk to you about. And then now you've been with HP, specifically I think HP Enterprise, for about 10 years, and currently the vice president and general manager, hyper-converged infrastructure. So pretty amazing background, pretty good group of customers too, or companies, I should say.
Yep, absolutely. It's been a good ride. 20 plus years in high tech. It's been an exciting spot. It's a good place to be. So in enterprise architecture, enterprise tech, which I think we can classify it as the whole time, a lot of this has been the common thread here looks like a lot of storage, right? A lot of storage sales, storage like product management, business development with iBricks, product management with HP, and now kind of running a big division of in general managing hyper-converged infrastructure. What I'm interested, kind of right off the top here, is you've been at it 20 years, you've been at storage 20 years. A lot has changed. What are some of the biggest themes you've seen, or what are some of the biggest changes? Maybe just in storage to start there, and then we'll go bigger picture. What have you seen in tech in terms of product, and then go to market? In that kind of time frame? Yeah, I think one of the things that I always kind of reminisce on is that when I started, it was all about storage, right? How can you store your bits and bytes and make sure that that's available? And then slowly over time, I think the conversation has definitely very quickly shifted to how do I manage my data, whether that's data virtualization or, how do I manage more data at scale? And then specifically, definitely over the last, I'd say 3, 4, 5 years, what can I do with that data to really affect things like digital transformation, certainly, the concepts around AI and analytics. It's not just a case of like, how do I store that data for the best price and protect it, but it's essentially like it's become the fuel for
most companies. If you take a look at a lot of the tech companies that we deal with, banks are now tech companies, retail is now tech companies, and they all rely on data. And one of the things is that it's never stopped growing exponentially since I started 20 plus years ago. So overall, as an industry, it started off fairly small in terms of how do I store things, to just this huge explosion of what can I do with this data? What can I do to shift my business model to be extremely data driven? So it's been exciting to watch and see and play in a lot of these different areas of this segment of the business. It definitely fuels a lot of the innovation that we've seen for customers today.
So one of the interesting things you just said there was, gone from bits and bytes, right? So you guys, when you started in your career, it's probably like, how fast is it? How many bits and bytes? How easy is it to store? How easy is it to get to, right? I mean, all that stuff. And then now you're like, all right, what are the insights I can get? How quickly can I get to those insights and use it? So what do you think as a provider of this technology? What do you guys try to do in terms of like a role? How do you help your customers figure that out? Do you play a big role in that, or how does it work?
Yeah, I mean, we have to play a big role in that. Two things that come up. The industry moved from when I started in, it was dollars per gigabyte and speeds and feeds, and how fast you can make these spindles run. But nowadays, nobody really, we have those conversations, they're foundational for the product, but really what people want to talk about are business outcomes. So if I have a workload or a stack that I'm going to put together, how can you as a vendor help me get to either the best dollar per workload, or how I can get that workload out as fast as possible, so accelerating time to market. And then the other area that we see, which definitely kind of fits into your theme around training-led growth, is around overall user experience. And so, yes. Your experience with the product is it's hard to define sometimes. Like, it's hard to put a metric around that, but it's one of the things that gravitates the customers to your products and offerings. So, being able to establish communities and train people on, how to get the best experience out of your product. There's a lot of threads around that, but essentially, you're ultimately, if you have a really good, very easy to the product, that is definitely tantamount these days. That's a big satisfier for a customer.
So engagement, so trying to get the users, your customers, your end. So your buyer, when you're selling, right? You're selling your products. It's CIO, CTO, Fortune 1000, big buyers, big contracts, right?
Yeah, and so we've got a number of different buyer personas. Some of them are, infrastructure, data center architects, and then up to the CIOs and CTOs. And then we have a whole set of new personas too, where you've got line of business and application owners now that are very interested in the data. And then there's even like brand new buyer personas, like, a lot of the larger companies now have folks like chief data officers and chief digital transformation officers. So being able to speak their language and have a really good product experience for those folks is it's a new community that you have to build around.
So also pricing models, right, have changed quite a bit from when you first started, kind of bigger, probably enterprise licensing, seat-based. I don't know. Actually, no, it's probably, well, talk me through it. So when you first started and you were selling the old bits and bytes to where you are now.
Everyone's selling, it started off as CapEx, right? So most capital expenditures, you try to put a solution in your data center and sweat that asset as much as possible. And now, even you take a look at Hewlett-Packard Enterprise, and one of the big pivots that we're making right now is providing all of our products and solutions by the end of 2022 as a service, right? You can consume it as $1 per workload or $1 per, some metric, right? That really that's tied to your business outcome. And so now that, you've shifted folks who are, and people will continue to buy on a CapEx, type of of sales motion. But now many of our customers are asking for things like give it to me as a service, metered, give me a managed service offering. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the things now that, in our current situation with the global pandemic, because we're able to do that, we're able to be very flexible with our buying terms. So, helping customers maintain liquidity, deferring payments, things like that. So it's a model that's helpful for both us and the customers.
So now, definitely more of a recurring revenue model, right? Specifically when you're doing those consumption based or the stuff that was a big transition, right? So when you're probably a lot for the sales teams, right?
Absolutely.
The sales team from selling probably massive, big upfront contracts to selling these recurring revenue model contracts. And that's not that was fairly recently, right? Where you guys had made that transition.
Yeah. And so, it's definitely a work in progress, right? So terms like ARR and TCV, much different than, what you got for a normal, hey, I'm going to, buy a piece of equipment for you and get an enterprise data center support contract for 5 years and amortize that equipment on a schedule. So it's a bit different, but that's what the customers are, want these days. And, certainly the cloud consumption experience has driven that. And we're, trying to keep pace with the customer's needs. So very different.
So would you say it is easier for customers to switch kind of providers now, or is that still and I'm asking because I'm kind of going down this road because I want to talk about product engagement more and coming back to that. But is it easier now for customers to switch providers if they needed to, kind of specifically in your world?
Yes and no. If you take a look at the enterprise technology world for large portfolio companies, there's been quite a bit of consolidation, right? So you got some major players out there. And so, people tend to be aligned with, certain vendors over time. I'd say that, right now, immediately, two things are there's two things that are introducing more risk into the equation, right? Switching vendors and certainly switching architecture. So, essentially doing something different. So, right now getting, working with customers to transform the way they do business and get new logos, it's, that's where you need to generate a lot of calories in putting a good community together and really having a product experience that is, an order of magnitude better or, order of magnitude cheaper, right? Or 10x faster from a deployment perspective. So you got to be really good. You have to really focus on that product experience to get someone to do something different. So in some cases, there is a little bit more, there is a little less friction in changing vendors. On the other hand, a lot of that change also requires you to do different things as an organization. And I've always found that the organizational changes and the way you set up teams and people are much harder to do than actually change physical and products at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the reason I was asking you kind of that questioning was because we live in the SaaS world, monthly recurring revenue, annual recurring revenue. And one of the most important things we find for our customers, as well as ourselves, is you have to have the people super engaged with your product, invested in the product. I love that you said community, like building community around the product and the solution set that you've got. So how do you guys do that? Like, how do you, and again, we call it the training-led growth podcast because we think learning and training and ongoing engagement's super important for these reasons. And that people, if they're using it and they're super engaged and they like your products and there's a community around it, they're less likely to switch because they feel, invested in taken care of. And so how do you guys do that? How do you think about that with hyper-converged and what you're doing?
Yeah, so one of the great things around the businesses that I manage today is that we have a great, what we call an insiders group. So we've developed a bit of a red carpet type of engagement for our top users. And so it's great for them. They get to build their own community, right? So they have other users, that use the product, and we can have direct engagement with them on things like, what kind of features do they need? What parts of the areas of the product do they need to invest in? Do we need to expand our ecosystem partners and things like that. And then, it's a virtuous cycle in terms of, it's great. They're in all sorts of different fields and verticals and customer segments. So, they're always happy to take reference calls, right? So it's always great to build that type of community that can engage with our product managers. We can use them for references. We bring them to our either our physical shows or our virtual events that we are having.
Yeah, virtual now, right?
They're all going to be virtual for time to come. But that's been okay. When you talk about the virtual events, we've moved a number of our very, very big engagements. We have a big end user customer show every year called HPE Discover, and that's going to be virtual. But what I've found is some of the things that we've moved from in person to virtual, we're getting a massive amount of engagement. Right. So, we did a big event a few weeks back for our biggest partners. And we had north of 3,000-4,000 folks attend online virtually and,
wow.
And great chats and building communities. And so it's, I think for better or worse, it'll be a hybrid model going forward. And people definitely like to do that. So the other ways we try to engage community too is outside of the insiders group. Some of the key things that we've been doing is certainly around training and certifications.
Nice.
And one of my goals this year with the team is to try to get as much information in the public for our customers to do two things. One, continuing to engage with the product. We run an agile method for our software development, and we want to get those updates to our customers as soon as possible so they can get, they consume that innovation. So we want to do education, how they do that, what's coming up, what are the benefits they're going to see. Secondly, is our customers are going to be doing most of their now online before they even talk to, one of our sales reps, whether it's an inside sales rep, end user sales rep. And so giving them,
yeah, let me just follow up on that real quick. So you want them to engage with content, with learning, with training before they even talk to an inside or outside sales rep?
Yeah. So if you take, for example, the term hyper-converged infrastructure. So at the end of the day, you've got things that you install in your data center, servers, networking, storage, and that's an architecture that people have done for quite some time. And hyperconverge essentially allows you to collapse all those layers together, make it very easy to manage. But it's something different. So what we do is, essentially we put out information for customers to educate themselves on what is this, right? Not so much why our product is better, but why your workloads and, what you can do to unlock some of the resources that you have in your IT organization. If you move to this new type of deployment, this new type of infrastructure, what does it buy you, right? What is it? Why you would do it? And then as you go through the buyer's journey, then we can start to talk about, how HPE does it, why our solution is differentiated. But we find that around those, and even for type of initiatives, so customers that are doing things like artificial intelligence, machine learning, these are relatively new subjects. So providing any type of information, educate them on the market and how they would approach these type of problems has been very handy, right? It's engagement early, and then they say, "Wow, that's really interesting. Tell me more. Tell me, your point of view."
I love it. I'm so happy you said that. I mean, seriously, because one of the things we try to, it's exactly what I think works really well is when you give someone knowledge, you give them learning ahead of time that's valuable. So someone goes out, learns from HP Enterprise, says, what the heck is hyperconverged? How am I going to do this? How is it going to benefit my business? You're basically giving people real information that they can get to a decision. They could, get them down the road to say, no, this is stuff that I want to buy. I want to engage with. That's amazing. I love to hear that. And it's a tenet of the training-led growth philosophy we have, is that you can give people that information and And then once they get to that through the buying process, make the decision, now you roll out the insider group, you roll out the red carpet, you say, now let's engage and do some deeper level training. Let's create some expertise. And by the way, I love what you said about with the insiders group, they then also get to influence product management, right? They're basically saying like, hey, we're using your product now. We like it. Maybe think about adding this function or to solve my business problem. But that's awesome.
And that's been great too. When you take a look at, some of the forces that really influence the IT world, one of them is definitely around open source, right? So if you take some of the plays from open source, right, you're very upfront, and it's a community driven on, like take a look at it from a product management perspective. People will upvote and downvote features. And if you open that up to, your insiders or your customer community, the market is very efficient in, pointing you in the direction that you need to move in.
So, one of the things I was thinking about, talk to me about, so certification, I think, is actually really important too, for two reasons. And I'll ask you, but one is that obviously if you get certified in some of your technologies, people they learn to use the product really well. They gain some level of expertise within the product, which probably makes them a happier user. Maybe they're just more engaged with you. Do you guys measure? Is that a key measurement for you guys? Like how many engineers? Well, the other thing too I was going to add is that they also it's helpful for their own careers too. I mean, if you get certified in certain technologies, it's a good thing because you've attained some level of expertise, that it's marketable. So what else? Is that everything that you guys look at? Do you look at like how many users are we getting certified? Do you measure that?
Yes. So we do have a whole set of certifications at HPE. There's a couple different ones, right? We have certifications that focus on the end user, right? And that's, from an education standpoint, that leads them to have a higher quality experience product, right?
Yep.
Because, at the end of the day, quite a bit of complexity in these products, and you want to make sure that for some, certainly for enterprise mission critical type of workloads that need to be up all the time, you want to make sure you're using the product correctly, right? And it's all things around deployment plans, reference architectures, things like that. So we have those, and then we do a lot of certifications for our sellers, both at HPE and for partner community as well too. Right. So we incentivize, which is not actually a word. We give our partners incentives to, maintain their certifications on the products, as well as our own internal sellers. So they understand the value prop. They can, very clearly educate our customers on, why they would want to use it and how it's going to, benefit their business. And then we have a number of technical certifications. So we're always trying to keep those up to speed, and we definitely track that part of our engagement metric.
If incentivized is not a word, I've got a whole word I got to remove from my vocabulary.
There's a lot of them.
I'm incentivized to remove that word from my vocabulary. So back to the product just a little bit here. I love this, by the way. This is great. I'm learning a ton about HPE. UI UX. How has that changed just in terms of, because you have a lot different user group. I mean, the personas that you've got now in your product sets are much bigger, right? You got a whole lot more people use them. So it must have evolved over the years to become much. Yeah.
I'd say that. So a couple things have happened, right? We, the people that we're targeting for our UX experience, those people I think they're becoming more generalized, right? So you want to have the people that I'd say deploy and manage the products on a daily basis can no longer afford to be experts in a very a narrow, deep discipline, So the days of just having a dedicated storage admin or a backup admin, nowadays it's really coming down to, you've got an overall infrastructure or virtualization admin, or, a lot of folks are reclassifying themselves as their organization moves towards more of a DevOps model. So I'd say people don't have the time to be super duper experts in the products. So you really have to cut down on the product experience from the number of knobs and dials and things that you can do with it. What we do is in the underlying product experience, using things like AI ops and machine learning to make those decisions for the customers, right, before they reach those breaking points on the product experience, is really what's resonating with customers. So we have a great suite of products, and essentially it's a SaaS platform for customer experience and support automation called InfoSight. And really what it does, it's all of our products essentially send millions of points of telemetry back to HPE every day. And we're able to take the collective product experience of all those systems out there and do global learning, so that essentially our product, your product that you have installed in your data center, learns from the experiences of everybody else in the user population.
Wow.
So that we can, if we come, one person encounters a problem, we can go fix that and push that fix out very quickly for everyone else. So there's a lot of cool things that are going on in infrastructure management that allows you to do that. And then what I'd also say is that the consumption experience is changing differently too, right? The days of, kind of hammering out a configuration or an RA for, days, weeks, and months with an end user sales rep. People really want to understand, I have a workload. I want to get $1 per workload for that and an outcome. Like, how can you do that for me in hours, right? So there's a lot of different things that are going on in the UX experience. In some cases, it's definitely becoming simplified, because having that that expertise that's in one specific domain is changing, right? And we're trying to, essentially what IT groups are trying to do is unlock a lot of those resources to go do other things. Differentiate on the apps, right? Differentiate on the services that they're extending to their, their end user customers. And then, essentially becoming very frictionless in how I consume the products.
You said one thing in there that I kind of wrote down, which thought was very interesting. Cannot be experts in a narrow, deep discipline. That is so interesting to me, because there's a very famous book too, right, that says that generalists, about how it's the power of being a generalist. But in technology, I think that's really interesting, because we think about creating experts in a given technology as a kind of a North Star metric for us. We actually look at that. We look at how many experts can we create in a given topic. But what you said is super interesting, because maybe it's not necessarily now deep in a very specific, like you said, knob or discipline. It's got to be like, we have to actually create a broader kind of swath of expertise across an architecture, maybe, or a whole infrastructure. And I actually think that level of expertise is valued probably more in an organization. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, and I would say that at the end of the day, IT is serving the business at the day, and as folks become, as more customers and more the market become IT companies, I think you're going to see that more and more. Is how does my discipline in the things that I'm responsible for impact the overall of the company, as well as how does it impact satisfaction scale of the services that that I'm working on, or that I'm extending to my end user customers. And so you have to have a pretty broad view of what you're working on. There's always going to be room for specialties, especially in new and emerging markets. But in a lot of cases, there's a lot of I'd say compression in the hybrid IT market on, features and functionality and, things that we're doing, HPE versus one of our competitors. And so, anything that we can do to make that just, overall easier for our customers is really important.
So one last question. Thank you so much, Patrick, for the time. But you mentioned competition. You mentioned people you're going against. So as the vice president and GM of a pretty big business here, how do you think about that? How do you plan for competition, or how do you stay ahead? Like, what do you guys, just at a high level, how do you guys think about differentiating?
Yeah. So, there's a couple of things that we do. We have, there's many different aspects of, strategic planning and whatnot. I always challenge my team to, make sure that we are in growth markets, whether it's, an actual, market itself that's growing, or you're pivoting your product or a portion of it to take advantage of, some of the tailwinds or new parts of a market, right? So, for example, HPE infrastructure portfolio company, right? HPE's been in business for 80 years, at this point, right?
Wow.
Original Silicon Valley startup. So we've had to, reinvent ourselves numerous times. And, right now what we're doing as a company is, how can you consume everything as a service, right? How can you simplify the user experience through, some of these new techniques around AI ops and predictive analytics, and ultimately at the end of the day, provide a very good experience, for our customers. And I think, there's a lot of product categories that are in different phases, like super mature, in the mid-cycle. They're, very new. But if whether you're in one of those product cycles or not, trying to find the niche of, where are the growth aspects of the market and how you can play in those and be, a clear number one or number two in that market is something that, we've always, from a strategic standpoint, that's always the guiding light.
Yeah, I love it. Listening to your customers too, right? I mean, that's what you're saying, I think, is that what do they need? How do we continue to service them? I mean, a lot of technology in there. And then talk to me just about what is HPE doing just to connect with customers? Is service still just a big component of what you guys kind of promote and what you do? Do you differentiate? How do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, service is a huge aspect of the business. It's actually one of our most profitable parts of our business at HPE. And I think services is great, and we always have to find ways to continue to automate service. Right, the best support situation is not to have a support situation. Right, so anything you do to compress that, automated case closure, anything around automation and engineering that into the product is great. I'd say the other thing that we've been doing to connect with customers, and one of the reasons why I've been at HPE for such a long time, is that there's a big hallmark value in HPE trust that our customers place in us. It's a very good, it's a fantastic place to work. And it's got a high moral compass in terms of the way that we engage with our, we think globally and act locally, and certainly that reflects with our customers. And I think at the end of the day, IT can be very, focused on technology, but there still is a people and emotional aspect of it. And you have to make sure that you're, continually to connect with the customers on that level, showing that you're a company out there. Because, when I started at Sun, right, my bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, I wanted to go out in the world and do great things with technology for people, right? Mm-hmm. I don't think that's ever changed. And so, like, being able to market that and extend that and have that feeling to, our customers, essentially saying that, we're here to do good, especially in times like this. What are we doing to respond to help customers? And I mentioned before about extending, credit and liquidity through HPE Financial Services and things like that. How can we help, first responders what can we do around very quickly shipping, equipment to folks that are, in verticals that are essentially essential services. So anything that you can do right now, I think as a tech company, which as a segment has been, I think painted as being a little bit ruthlessly capitalistic over the last couple of years. The thing that's definitely resounded with me at HPE is that we do build a community around the tech. We build it around, the business outcomes, but you also build it around, some of the things I mentioned before around hallmark, trust, being there for our customers. So I think it's really important to make sure that you have a little bit of the human side of it as well.
Yeah, I love it. That's why I asked, because I think that we talk a lot about technology and automation and a lot of this stuff, but at the end of the day too, we, having some human connection, some empathy, some real conversations with people, I think is what we all actually probably want more these days.
100%.
Yeah, that's good stuff. One last question for you, Patrick. Is that Provincetown, Massachusetts behind you?
It is. Our president, John F. Kennedy, had enough vision and forethought to, set aside a beautiful piece of land here in the Cape Cod National Seashore. So it's the Long Point lighthouse out there in Provincetown. Great place to go fishing and spend a few days with friends.
Yeah, I may have been out there one time. I don't know.
It's a great spot.
Hey, Patrick, this has been a great conversation. Thank you so much for the time. I'd love to do it again sometime. We'll get a little bit deeper. We'll get some feedback from our listeners and viewers. And thank you. I really appreciate your insight, and I've definitely learned quite a bit here. So thanks for sharing your knowledge.
Thanks for having us on the podcast. Keep it going.
All right. Thank you, my friend. We'll talk soon.